tonight's lecture. Okay, we're going to end early tonight. Oh, I love that cat photo. I assume that's someone's actual cat, or maybe it's just off the internet. Lazy cat. We have a 13-year-old, 13-pound female cat that definitely loves doing that. Okay, let's see. I got one more person to let in at this point, and then hopefully there'll even be a few more because the attendance is a little low. Okay, there goes another one. Um, all right, so tonight we're going to take a slightly earlier break and end earlier. I would guess a good 20 minutes before the your normal end time or maximum time of 9:30, which is probably going to be when closer. I mean, in other words, from this week after this week, from this week on. Well, there's 1 week where we can do that, but at least two of the next three, sorry, I meant the next 4 weeks after this, we'll have to go not to 9:30, but like 9:20 or so. It all depends on how many questions you have. But speaking of questions and comments, this is your chance. I always try to start every meeting, you've noticed, with feedback, input, questions, comments that are either directly related to the subject of the lecture, or in this case, broader questions at the college. Okay, I assume we've all seen Dr. Chong's email about the right, not having any in-person classes except for small sections, no lecture classes in person in the fall, everything remote. I don't know how everybody else feels, but I think that's a wrong decision. And I know I'm going out on a limb to have done this, but I just wrote another op-ed, it's my fifth actually, for the Santa Rosa Press Democrat about that subject. And I respect Dr. Chong. He and I have exchanged emails several times. He's read all the other op-eds I've had published and commented on them. And I didn't at all. It's not about a personal, disagreement. It's more the issues of what are the alternatives to only remote learning or only online learning for the rest of this year, all the way through till January. So I am not going to, I've already submitted the article. I didn't quote anybody. I just made my own comments as well as suggestions for how that decision could have been, done differently, whatever. And the responses from students I've seen, hi, that's interesting. Looks like we've got a workout going there. Hey, how you doing? Anyway, I just would like to hear if anyone has, because this isn't going anywhere else besides the group of us tonight, obviously. But people were quoted. Did you see some of you? The Oak Leaf is your school paper. And it definitely is well written. And I actually was interviewed for it, but they didn't choose to use my quotes, probably because I said I was going to submit an op-ed piece later. So that would be overkill. So there were 20, not quite 20 people, about half, about equally faculty, like 9 or 10 each, students and faculty, and only 2 people, that's 10% of, or maybe a little over, barely, and 12% decided that they like the decision. So it looks like Alejandro, you're having some issues with you. Oh, you're just trying to make a new action video. Okay, let's get to where I'll do the full screen, because then I would like to hear if anyone agrees or disagrees. There's no right or wrong here. Obviously, there are different ways of looking at the issues of what's safe and what isn't safe, and whether or not this should get to full screen. Okay, let's do this. Speaker view.
I have some questions about other stuff.
Yeah. So yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. For always, I take the questions relating to the class or anything about your work, your assignment, your grades as top priority. But I thought I'd give you the opportunity if anyone does want to make a comment. Does everybody agree with the decision, or does anybody think it might be premature, for instance, that it's over 4 months before classes start in the fall in late August? And
I know for myself in fall specifically, I'll be taking 3 lab classes. So I know I'll actually be at the campus for some of those classes.
That's good to hear. Yeah, that's the implication. Well, it's not the implication, it's the actual thrust of Dr. Chong's email. But lecture classes with reduced capacity, 50% would work in Annalee Hall, where I've given all the lectures on the main campus in art history for over 24 years now. they could do 30 students. That's a reasonable size class, and keep the social distancing, 50% capacity, more than 3 feet separation between, or at least 3 feet. And that's what the CDC says is recommended for all school indoor settings. And of course, people wear masks. And I think possibly they could require people to verify or prove before they enroll in an in-person lecture class, or maybe any in-person class on either campus, to prove they've had fully vaccinated their shots. I mean, that's not that hard to do. My daughter just got her first shot. She just turned 18. So she was very excited on Tuesday. And we're going to have her high school, Albany High, is going to have an outdoor only huge separation with more than 6 feet of space graduation ceremony, but at least they're having it. And in June, it's pretty safe. They won't get rained on. That I understand, but they're planning to return. In a high school, there's just as much risk from what I've been reading as there is for millennials, people over 18 or whatever, in college classrooms of the same size. And yet they're planning to return to at least some form of in-person. It may not be 100%. Hybrid, for instance, would be an alternative. Half the classes in each section, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, at least to give people the opportunity to have the face-to-face learning experience that at least a large percentage of people I keep hearing from are saying they're missing, and that it's not as effective online. As good as Zoom is, and it is a good platform, it's quite effective for the needs of this moment. But my goodness, when over 60% of the state has received at least one vaccine, and by late June, everyone who wants to be fully vaccinated will have had that opportunity well before then, probably. And the rest of the state, other colleges, not just high schools, but college campuses, state universities, Sonoma State is going to have 50% of their classes in person. Anything over 60 will be online. That kind of solution seems to make sense. Everybody, just before we get to other questions, I absolutely will give you all the time you guys might want to ask us. Your papers are due, of course, before midnight if you don't want them to be late. I sent everybody an email a few hours ago just as a reminder. And any questions you have at all about any other related topics to the grades, your grades, or extra credit in just a moment. But does anybody have anything else to add to that? Does anybody else feel that maybe there's, we're going to be missing something by not having any in-person lecture classes?
I added a bunch of stuff to the chat. Like my son goes to Carl Newman. They do a hybrid program where the teachers are in the classroom with some students, and then there's students on Zoom as well. So, I mean,
that's another form of hybrid.
It's been working for them for a month and a half now.
Interesting. Yeah. And San Francisco School District, the largest in Northern California, is returning to in-person. It took some major, heavy lifting, as Mayor Breed says, the San Francisco mayor. She had to really negotiate, difficult topics with his teachers union and parents and the school board. But they've managed to do it. They're going back in a phased in way, of course. And so certainly they're not going to have all the schools open, even in hybrid, in the San Francisco public schools, K through 12 by June. But by the fall, I'm pretty sure they will. At least what you described. That's interesting. That's another way of, I put several suggestions out there, which I had just heard from, all the other sources in the news media, as well as some of my former students who are going to Sonoma State, Sac State, SF State, and what those colleges with more students than we have. And I think smaller campuses. Pretty sure San Francisco State College campus is not as big as ours. Doesn't have as many big lecture halls. Well, certainly not more. Anyway, it's obviously a done decision. I just think it's premature at best to not at least give it until late May to see how the vaccination program and the CDC guidelines are shaping up. Well, okay, so if I do, as I will probably have some link from the editor of the Press Democrat when they choose to publish my piece. Again, extra credit, 5 points. It's an easy 5 points. I'll forward that link to anyone who is interested in it, or maybe I'll be able to post it. I forget if I can do it that way. Or you can find it for yourself, of course. They have obviously an online presence. I had several of you already done that with the last piece I had, and this one's more relevant to all of you than the other articles I've had in that newspaper. It's a good newspaper. It's won a lot of journalism awards, and I'm glad to see it still has a high readership if you count the online and the print edition. A lot of urban papers of that size are folding and going out of business or being bought by a conglomerate, which then only publishes once a week, you know. So I hope you agree journalism has a place in our future, in our society, however you consume it, you know. Okay, questions now about your papers. I am going to hold this up because now I'm trying to get, let's see, we had speaker view. I may have to go to, all right, hang on. Oh, it says full screen. That just means this. Okay, let's try this. Oh, it's doing that weird thing. Well, I guess you're going to get until we get to the actual lecture. You may get equal billing there, Wayne. I don't mind that, except that it's harder for you guys to see. I think. Why is it jumping around like that? That it hasn't done, at least. I've had one-on-one sessions with other instructors and my teaching assistants, and that's what it'll do. But not when we have. Let's see what we've got. Give it one more try, and then I may just have to. Well, if we do gallery view, then we do this, then maybe now we can do speaker view, and that might work. Nope, it seems to be stuck on this. All right, I hope you can see this. I did this last due date for the papers. Remember the format that if you want your paper entered into the other files with, I meant into the file with the other papers that are submitted correctly and on time, so you'll get your grade back from me, of course, via either my own grading of your paper or the readers, which you remember I always double check all of their grading before I forward the grades to each of you. If you want that done on a timely basis, please make sure that you follow the same format. And of course, this is Art 1.1. So obviously I just wrote that above there. Short paper, and it's obviously paper number 2. I hope nobody says it's number 1, or you'll get, your paper will be counted as only this first paper. So I guess I should do that right now. I mean, I just put this up about an hour ago. So here we go, paper number 2. I put it in my email though, that everyone should have gotten from both classes. Which is, of course, minor.
Is the subject matter of the second paper the same kind of premise as the first one, where you pick an art piece?
Good point to clarify.
I've been out of the loop for the past like week or
format.
So.
And I would also suggest that if you want to do something different, to broaden, if you did a painting first, you might do sculpture, a photo, a drawing, or architecture, but you don't have to. I changed my mind. I was going to make it for both classes. The second paper should be specifically on an architectural site, which I gave you guys a new handout I just created this semester. You should all have seen it. I sent that along with the second cover sheet about a week ago to all my students this semester. And so that would be something that you, by now, of course, you would have had to have made the choice and be finishing it up if you haven't already said it. I haven't gotten many papers yet, so I'm I'm assuming that I will get a lot more by midnight tonight. If it's later than that, remember the rule is 5 points off. If it's less than 7 days late, from 7 days on, it's 10 points off. But that, that could make a difference right there, 5 or 10 points in your final course grade. And again, to answer that last question one more time, it's up to you what topic you choose, and the grading is the same. If you look at the cover sheet, I don't know if anyone's had a chance to compare cover sheet number 2 to cover sheet number 1. They're exactly the same number of points, same categories, same method of grading, and they're both worth an equal 100 points, right? Okay, so my internet connection's unstable. Let me wait a minute. Take a little quick coffee. There we go. It should be stable again. All right. So any other questions? Now's a good time, because we have a really interesting topic to cover tonight that I bet a lot of you, some of you have said in your mini bios, you're from the part of this hemisphere we're going to study tonight, either born there or have been there. And a lot of you just traveled there. And we're talking about Central America, between Mexico and, well, below Guatemala. So the whole area between South America and the United States border is what we're focusing on tonight. But first, one more time, any questions about extra credit? I'm going to send you guys, I'll wait till I get most of the papers. So maybe in a week or so, just a heads up and a reminder of the categories for extra credit, because I've added one, I think, this semester. Yeah, well, the museums are open again. So that's, I think it's 6 options for extra credit, and how each one would work, how many points. And then of course you grade any point during the semester. I know I've been saying it a lot, but sometimes people forget. Just email me if you want to know how many points you have, including extra credit up to that point. And I can also tell you how many more points you'd need to get an A from that time through the final exam. Okay, is that it for questions about grades? All right, so here's what we're going to do. Anybody? Sorry, I thought I heard you.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Will you
Sure.
read the names of those who managed to get their paper turned in after class? I want to just make sure mine didn't come in late, because I sent it a couple days ago.
The
And I
only
know
trouble is that, well, I don't have that list in front of me. It's see, I have a mainframe that's out in a building that's not in my house. It's where my studio is.
all right.
Yeah, I saw what. Well, if you tell me a name, I might be able to remember, because it was only 6 from this class.
Got Michael Pickcabbage.
Yes, I saw yours. I got it.
Perfect.
Yeah, everyone's still fine even up till midnight. And I'll go ahead and tell you the truth is, as long as it's, let's say, before 1 a.m., I'm not going to be checking my email much after midnight, but I will check it sometime just a little after midnight. But I may be way too lenient. I have been told that by other teachers, friends of mine. But if it's at 12:05 a.m. because you were working on it, or you had trouble sending it or attaching the cover sheet, I'm not going to take 5 points off. But if it's like 8 a.m., that's obviously many hours after the deadline, yes, I would take the 5 points off. But if you send it in regularly, don't forget, it's got to be a PDF. Please attach the cover sheet so it's in the same file so we can grade it easily. And also that you send it to my markw@aol.com, which most of you have already been doing since your first paper. Okay, and I already held this up, but in case anybody still didn't get the format, right? No, what's below is just suggestions for research sources that I gave you before your first paper was due. So obviously it's short paper number 2 or 1.1. Otherwise you use that format with the underline last name, comma, first name. Then it will get filed correctly. Okay. So a little context. Some of you know this, I've been saying it all semester, but now we're at the end of that list of 5 different cultures around the globe, or areas, geographic areas, if you want to look at it that way, that are among these areas, the 5 oldest urban civilizations on Earth. And we've covered the other 4: Egypt, Babylon, or some people would say the Near East, right? The Middle East today, we mostly call it, India, China, and now tonight we're covering Mesoamerica, or you could say Central America geographically, that's the area. And that doesn't only include the Mayans. That's one of the main, if not the main focus. I think a majority of the slides are from Mayan culture. The Aztecs are later. That's when we do art 1.2 or 2.2. No, 2.2 covers that, which I've been teaching for years too. So the Aztecs are they are the last major urban civilization that was indigenous here in it's North America, of course, now Mexico, in this continent. And obviously the Spanish wiped them out. Everyone knows that. So that's a topic for another class. So everything up to, but not including the Aztecs, is the context for what we're going to talk about. The cities founded by these people, some of you know this, you've been there perhaps, or just studied these cultures, go back 4,000 or 5,000 years, about as far back as they do in many other parts of the world. There are older cities in the ancient Near East, that like Turkey, some of them are 9,000, well, not the current cities, but the oldest archaeological urban sites that they found, or go back at least 9,000 years. But 5,000 years of continuous history, which are is the date or oldest record we have for urban centers in pre-Mayan. We're talking about Olmec. Some of you know these terms, Toltec. We're not going to have time to go into them because there isn't as much left from them. But the first slide is from one of those two cultures. These predate the Mayans. And again, they go back at least 5,000 years. They had amazingly advanced and developed civilizations, of course, without any contact with other parts of the world. And
Just really quick,
for thousands of years. Please go ahead. Sorry.
we're not supposed to be seeing something, right?
No, not yet. You're about to.
Okay.
Yeah, good
Thank you.
question. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, we're going to start now with that. Because all you can see is my face and Wayne's, and then maybe your own. Okay, screen share. Uh-oh, why isn't it on here? Okay, that's all right. I'm going to have to do it the way I've done it before. It's right over here, the file. I did double check that it was fully loaded, but it'll take about a minute. Okay, so let's say the first slide is going to be the oldest, and it is from the Olmec culture. And why don't I go ahead and give you the title so you can, well, you should have it in front of you, but you can be writing it while I do this. And then I better concentrate on this to make sure yeah, here we go. Okay, so there we go. This is it. This is the file. It's a new file. I just added to it several images. I mean, okay, this first one, the first is going to be Colossal Head. Colossal Head. Here it is. Colossal Head from La Venta, 2 words, L-A and then V-E-N-T-A. Colossal Head from La Venta. Mexico is a location, the country, and you could ignore the little c. 900 BC. Well, that's almost 3,000 years old right there, and it could easily be over 3,000. That's the estimate archaeologists give it. Okay, first of all, I just want to make sure now, because it says it's screen sharing. Can people see this?
No.
No.
Uh-oh, wait a minute. Well, when it says screen sharing, that should be, let's see. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear the response. You should be able to see this on your screen.
Nope.
Uh-oh.
No, I can't
Oh,
either.
boy. All right, we got a problem. Another glitch. Yeah. If we hit that, it's gonna. All right, hang on. I guess I just try something else. Try it again. Okay. Give me about, why does it do that? This thing here. About 30 seconds. I may have hit it too fast. Oh, internet's unstable. Well, that's what it says now. Wait a minute. Boy, if you can't see it now, I'm going to have to back down of the, it's happened before, remember, at the beginning of the semester, and we resolved it. Okay, can you see this now?
Nope.
No.
The screen share is not working. All right, I'm going to give it one other try here. Why isn't the screen sharing function working? I'm just going to X out all of this. Go all the way, like you have to reboot things. That's common enough that we've all. Oh, okay. So this isn't working yet for some reason. So now I am going to try and get back to where the screen share is available. Wow, I see what it's doing. Okay. Oh boy, I don't know. It's never done this where it doesn't even want to go to the file. I mean, not to the file, but bring it back up again. All right, I'm going to try yet one more time here, because this is, obviously at least one of these will probably, well, certainly one of them will be on the final. There'd be a glitch we haven't figured out yet. I mean, haven't encountered yet. A new one, yeah. Another reason not to be all online only. Okay, here it is. Now we have screen sharing. Okay. Okay, well, it says it's on my screen. Hang on, I got to double check. It might not. Might be that I still have to hit screen share again after I put the image up. Okay. Now, can you see it?
Now we can, yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Yeah, it was just I had to go all the way back. I apologize for the delay. But since we have a lot fewer slides, we are still going to be able to end early, as I promised you, okay? All right, so let's get this full screen and let's resume where we were. You should have the title by now. All right. I want to get rid of this. Oh yeah, I just got to move this out of the way. All right, so this is a giant Olmec. Is the first fact about the meaning. Olmec is the culture this came from. It's O-L-M-E-C, Olmec, rulers image. It is an image of one of their early rulers, and the Olmecs were one of the first two urban civilizations in Central America. The other was Toltecs, T-O-L-T-E-C. There were others that were less known and are just now being researched. And they have been adding, that is, archaeologists and historians in Mexico mostly, but also other Central American countries in their own, heritage research of their own heritage, have found that there were cities that were isolated and had just one, urban center. But the Olmec culture and the Toltec, just like the Mayans and the Aztecs, thousands of years, keep that in mind, it was thousands of years before the Aztecs, and at least 1,000 years before the Mayans developed their cities. The Olmecs, this culture, where we're looking at one of their early rulers, and the Toltecs, who actually predate them even, they had multiple urban centers, and they lasted hundreds of years each. In fact, close to 1,000 years. So that's a pretty strong, statement to make, that you have cultures in the middle of a jungle, right, area, which is not easy to develop an urban center that had tens of thousands. They estimate the biggest cities. Today, that wouldn't seem large, but in the ancient world, the pre-Renaissance era, the pre-modern, as people sometimes call it, the last few hundred years, ancient times, that's a large city, 50,000, some of them. Now, later, they got even bigger. Under the Mayans, sometimes they were 250,000, and we'll get to that in a couple more slides, one of those cities. The biggest one in Mesoamerica was, of course, Tenochtitlan. If I say it slowly, I pronounce it correctly, the Aztec capital. That estimates range from 500,000 to 1 million. Even if it was only 500,000, it would have been one of the, if not the largest city on earth. But that's, much more recent. That's from the 13 to the 1500s. Okay, so what does this face tell us about the rulers of this culture? Well, first of all, he's wearing a helmet, probably hard leather. That's what most historians think. Of course, the corpses, or whatever you want to say, the human remains of these, long gone. Because if they were buried 1,000 years underground, they were not mummified, and they were not put in rock-cut tombs like the Egyptian pharaohs were. So we don't have many, if any. If I've never read there. Anybody want to add to this, please feel free, because you may have read more recent information. I've never read that there's been intact, let alone, or even partial human remains from any of the citizens, let's just say, residents of Olmec or Toltec cities 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, still found, existing today. So what we have to go on is their art. So this is about 9 feet tall. That's an important part of the meaning. When we say colossal, we mean many, many times the human size. And it was carved out of volcanic rock. I think you can tell by looking at the stone itself. Those are not, pot marks from acid rain or from somebody using this for target practice or damage, either human or climate effects. It's the actual texture of the stone. It's about porous volcanic rock because I think everybody knows Central America is a highly seismically active area. Mexico City had an earthquake in the 80s. I know that's way before most of you were around, but I remember it. They killed tens of thousands of people, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people, way more than any American earthquake has, including San Francisco, which, by the way, killed about 3,000 people. It was our biggest earthquake in this country. Okay, so you have this culture, which was, very obviously close to the land and affected by everything from the jungle climate to the volcanic, landscape around them. And then they would use volcanic stone to create these images in honor of their past rulers. And then another feature about it that I think makes it really interesting is the facial features are slightly exaggerated. The eyes are a little larger than they would have been proportionate to the rest of the face, and the lips, certainly, possibly the nose. So that's a stylizing, and that's another advanced technique to stylize works of art, right? Not make them strictly realistic down to every last detail, which of course was what the Renaissance, right? We covered that at the beginning of the semester, era was trying to do with their paintings and their sculpture. By stylizing them, that shows, of course, a technique developed by that culture as a kind of unique way of depicting their own culture, their own people, or their own, environment. And that's usually considered more sophisticated, more advanced artistically. Not everybody would agree, but that many people would agree. Takes some, more complex thought process. Yeah, it's an amazing piece, and I can tell you where you can go see it. Not this exact one, but almost exact duplicate of it, and it's the original piece, and it's a little older than this. I think it's 1200 BC or BC. Mexico City, the National Anthropology, you have to write this part, National Anthropology Museum. It's one of the best museums of historical, cultural, whatever, artifacts I've ever been to. And that includes the Louvre and the Met in New York and the Field Museum in Chicago, which are the three best the British Museum. Okay, those are the four best in Europe and North America. I would amend that and say at least among the top five anyway. You'd have to include the one. It's a new museum in Mexico City. I think it opened early this century, pretty sure. And it is fantastic. And right outside the museum, each section, each portion of the museum dedicated to a different culture. The Toltecs have a wing, the Olmecs, the Mayans, the Aztecs, and it's all pre-Columbian or native cultures on display. Besides the artifacts, which are wonderful, including paintings and sculpture and burial objects, you go outside each of those sections and there are pieces of large public sculpture that those cultures created. So these heads, there's one of them as you sit down and have your Pacifico or Tecate or whatever it is you want, great varieties of beer that are produced in Mexico, of course, that are served in these cafes. It's just a fantastic museum, everything about it. It was well run, it was well displayed, the exhibits, the text, there we go. It was in English, of course, Spanish first, English, and I think maybe French or German. And there were, all kinds of translators available, both audio and human. It's a great museum. National Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. Most Americans never get there. All right, let's do a formal analysis. This is balanced, completely symmetrical, of course. It's a single mass, or if you wanted to break it down into the helmet and then the head, of course, the head is the largest mass. For space, well, it's larger than life. I just said it's about 9 feet tall. By the way, it weighs about 4 tons. That's pretty impressive. Well, 2 to 4 tons, depending on what kind of stone. They're not all volcanic stone. Some of these are granite. The one I think outside the Olmec section of the Museum of Mexico City, I believe it's solid granite. Didn't have this pot mark. I mean, texture, which would again indicate the volcanic stone that it was made from. So they range, these colossal heads. They made hundreds of them, and they've been found in the jungle right where they were created, isn't with the ruins of the cities around them. I meant to say that earlier. So that's another fact. You could add that to your notes on the meaning. In any case, they've been found almost intact. I mean, there's hardly nothing missing from this. Sitting in the same place for thousands of years, all over Central America, from southern Mexico all the way down to Nicaragua, Guatemala, where the Olmec culture reigned for about 1,000 years. In any case, so they weigh 2 to 4 tons. That's why I say it's a single solid mass, not hollow. And then there's the rhythm, of course, of the eyes, the lips, and the nostril, and the ears. The ears with an earpiece. It looks like we might be listening to something way my daughter does 24/7. But that's supposed to be a guard, a metal guard over their ears for combat, of course, to protect their ears. So that creates rhythm. And then color is cool, of course, here. It's obviously gray. The modeling is shadows created by the sun. The line is all carved line everywhere. There's no painted line. It's both it's mostly stable, though. I was going to say both, but only the details around the lips, the nose, and the eyes, and the very top of the head, okay? Of course, where the helmet is curved. Those are dynamic details. But the overall shape of it and posture of this is stable. So it's more stable than dynamic. And are we missing anything? Texture, oh yeah, simulated texture here is, I would call it pretty good on the face, the lips, the nose, and on the helmet, because that clearly is a different texture, even though the whole thing is pockmarked with volcanic stone. Pitted is actually the right word. Okay, so there is both the real texture of the volcanic stone and the cement texture on the face and the helmet. All right, let's see. Now, I think with this one, the next one is the next must know. By the way, I don't necessarily stick to the exact order. I've said that all semester. So we are going to see all the 8 slides tonight and definitely still end early. But the sequence after the first one I just showed you may differ from what's on the syllabus. So hopefully that doesn't throw anyone off. Okay, this is the Temple of the Sun. Has anybody been here? This is Teotihuacan. I love the way that, if you say it correctly, it has a very nice poetic ring to it. The name of this city, it's a mystery of history. I love that phrase too. I read it somewhere years ago. It's a mystery of history. Nobody knows what happened to this urban civilization. It isn't any of the above. This was the Teotihuacan culture. I was sort of hinting at that with the first slide, meaning what? That this was one of the largest urban centers in what's now Mexico, or just generally in Central America. At its time, it probably was the largest city. And it goes back to about 300 BC. And then somewhere between 300 and 500 or so AD, so what's that, 6 to 800 years, it disappeared. The culture, not the city. The city is there 25 miles outside of Mexico City. You have to take, mostly rent a car is what I did. I didn't rent the car. Some friends of mine I met in Mexico City offered to give me, a ride out there, and I'm glad I did that. Hot and humid though it was. Anybody here been to Mexico City or to Teotihuacan or to any pre-Columbian archaeological sites? I thought I saw some people say that in their mini bios. Nobody? Okay, well, anyone wants to speak up. Anyway, if you do go, you won't forget the experience. This city had 250,000 people. This is not one of the must-knows. I'm just giving you context. We'll move on to the next must-know in just about a minute. But look at the height of this pyramid. It's 220 feet. It was the largest pyramid in Mesoamerica or Central America that has yet been found. And it's nearly intact. The only thing it's missing is the temple on top. And the Spanish found it mysterious. The Aztecs thought it was a city built by their gods. They couldn't explain it any other way. And look at these, these are full-grown trees. And here's a parking lot. Look how they're dwarfed by this. Is almost, it's about half the size of the largest of the Great Pyramids, of course, which we are covering in this class. But the point is, you've all seen pictures of that. That's 460 feet high. So this is nearly half that, 220 feet, not counting the temple on top, which is probably another 20 feet. And then here's another large pyramid. There are about a half a dozen at that site. Okay, so now let's go to the next must-know, which is from Teotihuacan, and so it's on your syllabus. If you go down the list here, this is, hang on, temple. Yeah, it's the second one on tonight's syllabus. Temple of the Feathered, with an ED, Feathered Serpent. Great name, and it's very self-descriptive. Temple of the Feathered Serpent. Teotihuacan, of course, I'll spell for you slowly. Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan, Mexico, 350 AD or CE. Okay, so now what you have is toward the end of that, latter part of the Teotihuacan culture. That's what it's called. I mean, it was a culture centered around one major city with other smaller satellite towns that they ruled. But as I said, it lasted hundreds of years, just say several hundred years, from before the Common Era till around 500. Some stretch it to 600, but by 600, the Mayans were dominating Central America. So what do you have here? You have the two most important gods to almost, here's what's interesting to me, that it's a common thread throughout almost all of these cultures, or at least from the Common Era forward. The Toltec and the Olmec, I'm not sure if they had the same two major gods. Of course, we're not saying they only had two gods. These cultures, like most ancient cultures, had multiple deities. But the two most important or powerful gods were the two on this pyramid. This is, as we just said, temple. Well, that's at the top of a pyramid. So some people just call it the pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. But in any case, it is what's at the top of one of the other pyramids in Teotihuacan. I just described it to you. So if you didn't write it then, now you should, which was at the time this was built, the largest city in Mesoamerica or Central America. It had about 250,000 people, and it was mysteriously disappeared or destroyed. We don't know what happened. Did people leave? Did they have a plague or a drought, or if there was war, there'd be some record. Usually that's an event which cultures record, but we don't know what happened to them. The city just suddenly, the population of the city disappeared, whereas the city itself is still sitting in nearly intact outside of Mexico City, in the high deserts, up above the city of Mexico City. Okay, so who are these two major gods? That's the main part of me. Let's get up close. We have the rain god, which to me looks like it's made. This is not the least bit meant to be sarcastic or satirical, but my daughter said this once when the first time I ever showed this slide to her, after my first trip to Mexico. Well, actually, it was before we adopted her, but first time I showed these slides after she came with us home from Russia. She said, it looks like some kind of creature made out of Legos. It kind of does. It's an oddly shaped creature that doesn't even look like it relates to any living animal or human, whereas the other god clearly does. So this is called the rain god. Just call it the goggle-eyed. Now that's what Stockstead calls it, and I think that's an accurate term. Goggle-eyed rain god that is a god of life, of rebirth, of growth. Of course, with rain comes life, with water comes life. And then this is the other major god of the two most powerful gods that almost all of the Common Era, that's the right way to say it, pre-Columbian cultures, or you could say just native Mesoamerican cultures, believed in. The Aztecs believed in, the Mayan believed in, the Teotihuacan culture did. These two gods is their most important ones. And the other one is the Feathered Serpent god, which is the god of death, of destruction, of war, and all kinds of other negative or destructive forces in the universe. So again, it's a lot like, with Buddhism and almost every other major philosophy or religion from the ancient world, and even today, right, that have survived till the present. There's some kind of a balance, or yin and yang, as a phrase is often used by some of the Asian philosophies, right? Especially in my knowledge limited as it is of Buddhism, you have, and Hinduism, of course, you have either one god like Shiva does in Buddhism, have powers over both life and death, and growth and decay, and destruction and creation. So that's what these two gods symbolize. You see how much there is in common among world cultures. When you look at it, it's rather remarkable. These people had no contact with any of the Western cultures that existed at that time. Not that we know of. I mean, it's possible some Viking ship came. It wouldn't be Viking, it'd be Roman at this point. But there's no evidence of that. None, zero. So they created a very similar concept of how the universe functions, except they personified their two main gods, the god of destruction as a feathered, literally, serpent's head, or serpent, that's just the head of it. And then the opposite god, the god of creation and life, as a goggle-eyed rain god, okay? And so this is on a part of the building. Now, here's your first term. There's only, I think, 2 for tonight. Yeah, there's only 2 that we have to cover. So here we go with the definition. You should have this sheet, as always, in front of you during each of the lectures between now and the final. So it's a hyphenated term, Talud Tablero. It's on your handout, so I shouldn't have to spell it. But in case you don't have it with you, I will. Talud, Talud hyphen Tablero, Tablero. Talud Tablero is a term that describes, and here we go, it's a method of construction for, I'm going to go ahead and say pre-Columbian because most historians still use that word. You can just say early Mesoamerican, it's a lot longer if you want to write it that way, or pre-Columbian pyramids, because he really is not a temple. That's a misnomer, but that's what Stockton calls it. So that's why I listed it in the syllabus that way. So again, I'll start over. It's a method of construction for pre-Columbian pyramids where a flat shelf, that's what this is. You see that here, we're there, down here. Let's do it down here. A flat shelf alternates with ornately decorated panels depicting the most important gods. Okay, I should say their most important gods. Once again, it's a method for construction of pre-Columbian pyramids where flat shelves alternate with richly decorated panels. You can say carved is a better word, probably. You should say carved because they are carved, of course. We'll do the formal analysis in just a moment, which contain images of their most important gods. And here we do, we see just that exactly. Now there are other objects here. This is probably corn. Probably corn, maize, right? It's hard to know, but that's probably what it is, which was one of their subsistence crops, of course. You'll have to write that last thing. Okay, let's do the formal analysis. Well, if you see the whole thing, it's balanced left to right and weighted or unbalanced toward the bottom. It's hard to tell, but you can see the blue sky up here, right? Obviously, so you can tell it slants outward wider as it goes, of course, toward the ground. So it's unbalanced towards the bottom, balanced left to right. The rhythm is obvious. The shelves, right, or talud, and the tablero, which is the word for that in Spanish, right, the panel, that creates powerful rhythms all the way up the entire 200 plus feet of this pyramid. And the images carved create rhythm, of course, repeated images of feathered serpents and rain gods. That's all done with carved line. Is there a simulated texture? Well, what does a rain god or feathered serpent look like in real? No one's ever seen one. So at least not when they were in their normal state of mind. So you could just say that there is implied simulated texture done with carved line on the two gods' heads. The rest, and on this one here, there's the feathered serpent again, but here he is lying flat. So on the images of the gods, there is what could be called simulated textures, but otherwise it's all the real rough texture of the stone itself. The color is a cool gray color. The modeling is the strong shadows from the sun, of course. For space, there's overlapping, you would have to say that, but there's real space too. So the overlapping is the only technique for space where the two types of gods' heads overlap the background, right? Otherwise, it's the real space of a multi-level roughly 200. You can say near. I think this one's slightly under, but say about or nearly 200-foot tall pyramid. And of course, that's all real space. And then we have, let's see, rhythm, of course. I already mentioned that. Oh, dynamic. Yeah, it's dynamic on the heads of, well, more so on the feathered serpent, because the rain god is a lot of, most of its face or head is pretty much stable, except for the round or goggle eyes. So we have more stable on the rain god and almost entirely dynamic on the feathered serpent. And then the platforms, the shape of the pyramid is stable, of course, because it has flat platforms and then flat backgrounds. So there's both stable and dynamic details here. Okay, I think I covered everything. Yeah, okay. Now, this is one of the cities that is continuously expanding in the archaeological finds from it. So it's a view of the next must know. So actually we are following the order of this now. We'll do one more and then take an early break. Temple of the Giant Jaguar. Temple of the, well, actually, why don't we do two more after this and then take a break. Temple of the Giant Jaguars, Jaguar. If you're British and you have friends from Britain, or you ever see British actors in movies, you can't pronounce that word. No, I'm kidding. They call it Jaguar. And that's phonetically correct. So that might help people remember. But of course, you don't have to memorize how to spell it. Remember, is all those comments about people cheating on their exams online that some of the instructors are complaining about. I don't agree with that. What are you going to say? I mean, of course, it's an open book test and you can look at your notes. It's the nature of the entire format that can't be avoided while we're all online. So I don't consider that cheating. Anyway, and how would you enforce it even if you did? Okay, the location is 2 words now because Guatemala is one of the most common sites for these ancient cities. This is a Mayan city. We'll talk about that in a minute. Tikal, Guatemala. Tikal, Tikal, first word Guatemala, I think you all know, but I'll spell it. Guatemala. Guatemala. You can ignore the little c, remember, that's just a shorthand way of saying we don't know the exact date, rounding it off to 700 AD or CE. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at a 9-level pyramid. That's not a minor point. This is the view that'll be on the exam. I know it's got a little mark, there, but it doesn't obscure the structure because look how much clearer this slide is. But this is the one that Stockstad provided. So I wanted you to see the overall setting. This was one of the largest Mayan, and I think everyone knows that's Mayan cities in ancient Mesoamerica or Central America. You can see that there are a number of other multi-level structures. Here's another pyramid, not anywhere near as tall, maybe half the height, which has part of the original temple left. And then this was in front of a public plaza, and these were dedicated to their past rulers, and there were sculptures sometimes. In this city, there were definitely Tikal had lining. They don't only have one square, but this would probably be the largest or the main square in the center of the city. Then you could see that there are images, or at least some kind of written record of past rulers. And then this temple is dedicated to one of course, their major gods, right? And it's got 9 levels. So why 9 levels? Now let's go to the next image of it and you'll see that it has just that 9 levels with a temple on top, because the Mayans believe there were 9 levels to the underworld. And that is somewhat similar, but not exactly the same as the concept of hell. If you know anything about, don't write this, Dante, right? The famous medieval poet from Italy that wrote about hell. He had 9 levels of purgatory, of hell. And depending on how bad your sins were, you went to a lower level than people who were less sinful. That's not what they're saying here. The Mayans believe that the underworld was where everybody went after they died. And they, weren't all bad. Parts of the underworld were terrible, were like hell, a kind of hell, you could say, a form of hell. Punishment, if you will, for bad or sinful behavior. Well, they wouldn't consider the word sinful, just say unacceptable behavior of some kind, a destructive, behavior, you might go to one of the unpleasant levels of the underworld. But if you behaved reasonably well in your life, you could go to a pleasant level. So they believe there were 9 levels for all deceased souls, or departed souls, I should say, to go to after they died. And that's why this is a 9-level pyramid. At the top is a temple, or some would say it's more like a sacrificial room, but it was a temple because the Mayan priests, we're going to see evidence of that in the next slide, would conduct various rituals there, including, yes, human sacrifice. They did do that. There was a time when I was growing up, and even when I went to Cal Berkeley and by graduate school, they were saying that by the 80s that wasn't, the Mayans definitely did have human sacrifice, but they also had many other, more often they had other kinds of religious ceremonies in these temples. And one of them was the Mayan bloodletting ritual of their own priests, letting their own blood out onto the stones of these temples, or of the pyramid. Some people call the whole thing a temple. Technically, you should say the pyramid has a temple on top, and that's what this is. So let's go up and take a look at it. The temple on top, where the sacrifices and other religious, and not only sacrifice, but various religious ceremonies, including human and priestly sacrifice, by which the priest sacrifices their own blood. We'll get to the details of those kinds of ceremonies, both bloodletting ceremonies and non-bloodletting ones, were conducted on their high, holy, or major religious events, right, during their events. So, well, what's this? It's a comb, like a rooster would have. I think it's supposed to be emulating that, but there are different opinions. It's called a comb, C-O-M-B, by historians and archaeologists. The Mayans believe that that was an important detail at the top of each of these pyramids, above the ceiling of the temple itself. The space inside the temple is usually just one big room, sometimes 2, where the priest would conduct those ceremonies. And then above that is easily another 20 feet of stonework. It's deteriorated, so you can't see much detail, but it's supposed to be evocative of a rooster's comb, and some people think that was symbolic of the fact that the temple was also dedicated to whoever the local ruler was at the time it was built. So that's the last fact.
Are the steps on either side broken, or are they supposed to be real narrow?
Yeah, let's get a close up. That is a good question. I was going to hope someone had been here. I thought I had some of my, you guys, I mean, your mini bio, somebody said they actually went to Tikal, or at least had been to Guatemala. Anybody know? Because I honestly haven't read that specific fact about it. I would think that they're trying to prevent a lot of people from going up here, whether that's an original feature from, let's see how many years old, 1,300 years ago, which the Mayans themselves were trying to limit access, maybe, to just the priest and their staff or their assistants or whatever. And of course, the future sacrifice victims were forced at the point of a sword, probably mostly, right, or a spear, to climb up here before they were sacrificed. But for tourists, that also makes sense, because this is a very dangerous. Look at that. It's moss covered. I don't even know if they allow you to go up there. That's why I wanted to know, has anybody been to any, not just Tikal, any of these cities and climbed up any of these pyramids? I did not try to climb up the ones at Teotihuacan. It was like 100 and some degrees that day with no shade. And I was recovering from some Montezuma's revenge, they called it, from something I ate somewhere at a street market, foolishly. Anyway, the point is I didn't have the strength to go up these stairs. Anybody here done that? Anybody? No? I thought some of you had.
You can on the ones in Mexico City, but
yes,
there's a limit of people you can go.
You can go. Do you know about this one? Have you been to Tikal in Guatemala?
Oh no, I don't know about this one.
Okay, the ones you have been to, you yourself have climbed up them? Because I've seen plenty of videos and travel logs about that. You can, most of them, right? I imagine this one's so steep and narrow that they didn't want to have a lot of people go up it, but I don't know that for sure. You notice that there are tourists here. Let's go back. Yeah, and then we'll wrap up with the formal analysis. In groups, mostly with a tour guide, I assume. And none of them are, well, let's go up close. This guy's just standing there. It doesn't look like he's trying to go up. I think some places you can and some you can't. That's what I've been told. So I guess you're kind of confirming that. And obviously in some places you can, because you see that in some documentaries on the History Channel, right? Okay, let's do a form analysis, and it's based on this image. So again, this is what you'll see if it's on the final. It is obviously, like all pyramids, balanced left to right and unbalanced or weighted toward the bottom. The rhythm is obvious with all 9 levels, the stairs, and even the comb, so to speak, on top. The decorative stonework on top has some kind of rhythm, though when it was new, it probably was a smooth, carved, decorative surface. So now the surfaces, the textures, there's no simulated texture. It's all the real rough texture of the stone. This is also real rough texture, but it's got plaster over it. So you could say, you know, plaster and white paint. Is that original? That seems more Spanish to me, but it could be that that's what the Mayans painted this. I don't know if we have a way of knowing, because there are no color images from that far back. In any case, so what you had was, you know, a real rough texture all the way from top to bottom of stone only. The color is a cool gray color. Then it is dynamic on the sides, right? And, well, the stairs too, but stable, of course, on each of the flat sections of each level. So it's both, really. And the temple, the bottom part of it, where the ceremonial rooms are, if there might be 2, there often were, that's completely stable. And the comb above it, the decorative top is dynamic. The line is all carved line. That's the only kind of line you see here. The modeling is just the shadows from the sun. And then we have, for space, this one is about 180 feet tall. No, it's not quite that. No, it's 140. That's right, 140. There are some that are taller, even probably in Tikal. I have not been there, but I've seen, you know, again, documentaries about it. So this one's about 140 feet. That's still the equivalent of what, a 14-story skyscraper, right? So about 140 feet high, and that's real space. There's no techniques for space. I think I said the modeling's right from the sun, the shadows. I think that's it. I don't think I missed anything. Rhythm, balance, texture. Okay, this is another view of a different section of Tikal. And you see, look at this pyramid. It's much shorter and wider, but it has a much larger temple on top. The sacrificial space, or I should say ceremonial space. Okay, and then here's, this is one where, look at that tower. That's 5 stories. It's as tall as anything the Romans ever built. That was the highest. Well, not true. That's not quite true. The Colosseum was taller, of course. It's 160 feet tall. But that's a pretty tall structure, and it's a residential compound. Or some people think it might have been used, but it's not big enough for a ball court, you know, where they had their version of soccer with human heads as the ball. That is what they did from their enemies, you know, which had been, of course, whatever, treated so that they could be used as a ball, almost as like, you know, soccer balls. But that's not big enough for that. So this would have been some kind of residential compound where perhaps it was a palace of one of, if not the main rulers, one of the ruling elite. It's fascinating. Yeah, I'd love to go there. Okay, now we get to the next must-know. Here we go. This is Mayan bloodletting ritual lintel. Mayan, M-A-Y-A-N, bloodletting, one word, right? Of course, with 2 T's. Bloodletting ritual lintel is L-I-N-T-E-L. Again, Mayan bloodletting ritual lintel, comma, Mexico. 725 AD. Okay, so now we're in the golden age of the Mayan culture. Was it an empire? That's a difficult question to answer. In my, and most historians that I've read or talked to or known would agree, an empire is like the Aztecs. Definitely, that was an empire. They conquered other people and ruled over them from within their own, you know, homeland or you know, base. The Mayans, it's a little less obvious that there was a single ruler. You know, Montezuma obviously was the ruler over the Aztec Empire at the time the Spanish under Cortez arrived. So this is not that, the Mayans weren't like that in that they didn't have only one ruler over all Mayan cities, but there was some unification or some connection between those cities at any given period. So it's more like a loose affiliation of city-states. If you want to compare it to anything, it would be like ancient Greece. You know this, right? There was no one government that ruled over Greece like Rome did over all of the Roman Empire, first over Italy and then over the whole Western world, practically over 3 continents. With Rome, it was no question that was an empire. But with the Greeks, later on, they conquered other people under Alexander the Great, but he wasn't even Greek, right? So you could just say it's similar to what some ancient cultures like the Greek city-states were. They were confederated, they were allied, they were associated, but they were not all ruled by one dominant city and one single ruler. So I don't call them an empire. You can write that however you want, but they were a unified culture. They had the same religious ceremonies, and here's evidence of that all over every Mayan city. When they find remnants of the art, the carved, it's bas relief. By the way, this is a bas relief panel from above the opening, or entrance to a Mayan temple, which was probably then on top of a pyramid, right? So I think you see from the last couple of slides how that works. So a lintel is any piece of stone that spans an opening. Stonehenge is full of lintels. You've seen pictures of Stonehenge, and we didn't cover it in this class. This is my other class, but those giant pieces of stone across the top of the uprights that are in a circle. You've all seen pictures of Stonehenge, I assume. Lintels go back literally thousands of years. So this was a decorated lintel with life-size, this is the main part of the meeting, a life-size image of a Mayan priest, a high priest. How do we know he was like the top priest during that ceremony in that Mayan city? Because of his headdress. Look how ornate that is. Let's get this down here. It's gold, by the way. This is gold. Usually they were gold. The metal, what looks like metal, is usually gold. And, ornate bird feathers. They just say ornate headdresses were an indication, as well as cheek pieces. I don't know any other word for it. You want to come up with a different word, you can. Coming all the way almost to the edge of their mouths on both sides, of course, of their faces. That all put together indicates the cheek pieces and the and the robe. Sorry, you have to add the robe. That's a piece of gold. Definitely, that would be gold, as probably much of the necklace was, or maybe it was alternating gold and silver and other precious metals. And then the robes. Look how ornate the robes are. Some people think that looks like a cross. No, nothing to do with Christianity. Not at this point in this part of the world. Anyway, it's an interesting parallel, right? That there's a cross-like symbol in the Mayan art that goes back, almost 2,000 years. So this is a high priest. You can tell by the way he's dressed, his robes, his earpiece, and his headdress. And he's conducting the Mayan bloodletting ritual, where he takes, the Mayan priest would take these large thorn vines, very large, look how big those thorns are, and prick themselves on one of the most painful parts of the human body, the inside of their mouths, over and over and over again. That's what he's doing until he produced enough blood each time, his mouth filled up, or it was full of blood. He would spit it into a stone cup, probably right at his feet, just nearby, let's say. And do that, till you could pass out, quite literally, of course, from loss of blood. And it could even be dangerous because they knew when to stop, to not risk their lives. And once they got that cup, that stone, container or cup is the best word I can, full of blood, each of those priests, and there were several priests doing this, maybe anywhere from, 3 or 4 to a dozen at once during each of these ceremonies. They then would pour the priest's blood over the side of the pyramid. So let's go back and see how that would look from here. And the blood would flow down into the ground below. And the point of that was to sacrifice to their gods, to show their loyalty, right? Their respect for and their loyalty to their gods, to guarantee healthy crops. Of course, they depended on, obviously, they didn't just hunt. I mean, there wouldn't have been, enough food for these large cities if they always had to go out every day and hunt new animals. They could have produced cities of up to 250,000 population. The largest cities the Mayans had were up to, we can't say for sure, but could have been, or up to as large as 250,000. That's what is like the population of Petaluma and Santa Rosa combined. That in the ancient world is a very large city. Not all the Mayan cities, or most of them weren't that big. They were in the tens of thousands, but some of them were over 100,000. So they had to have a successful crops, of course, every season to feed their own people. So the priests, one of their jobs was to help guarantee that by sacrificing their own blood to their gods. And they did it this way with this Mayan bloodletting ritual, and then pouring their own blood down the side of the pyramids into the ground below. The symbolic gesture or offering, you could say an offering to their gods. Okay, so that's the main part of the meaning on this one. Formal analysis. This is, you can't see the whole thing. I spent like 20, 30 minutes, my wife and me together, going through all the files we could find. For some reason, there was no transferable, right? Because they exist on the internet, but that you could use. I guess they were copywritten by the photographer or the Mexican or Guatemalan government. So at this point, this is the largest and clearest image I could have. But I've seen the whole thing, this very lintel. So I can describe it to you. You just have to write this. It is balanced, the figure of this man. I'd say the thorns in his hand balance with his headdress. His head and his body are upright. He's not kneeling or anything. He's standing fully upright. So it's balanced, left to right and top to bottom, roughly balanced. Rhythm is very obvious with the necklace and wristbands, the decorative details. You can say it's fabric because it would be a fabric patterns on his robes and his headdress, obviously with the feathers and the metal, the ornate metalwork. And of course, obviously his hands and the vines create rhythm. And those have similar texture, which is of course done with carved line, but there is also obviously the real rough texture of the stone. This is not volcanic stone, but you could just say rough stone. Real texture mostly in the background, somewhat on his face, but similar texture almost everywhere else. Carved, created, I should say, by carved line. And then it's dynamic in some details. Obviously, he's mostly stable. I should have added this. But the details, of course, on the thorned vines and the position of his hands, and certainly you could say the headdress itself, those are all dynamic. The modeling is obviously very much part of the composition, because remember, in a bas-relief panel, you couldn't see the details if it weren't for modeling. The artist incorporates the modeling of the sun, of course, created by the natural shadows, into the design. So there's strong modeling here, of course. And then we have for the largest mass, it's him. And then you could say his headdress, and then the thorn vines. Or the vine, it's really one vine here. And then for space, it's a life-size human figure. They were about 5'3". Even I think the Aztecs were something like 5'5" on average. That isn't absolute, but the average adult male's height. So it would be, just say, over a life-size full adult male figure of about a little over 5 feet, or you could say 5 to 5.5 feet. And then overlapping, of course, is the only technique. There's no other technique for space. Overlapping the headdress over the body and the robes as well, over the rest of his body, and his hands over the thorns here. So let's do one more because it's related, and then we'll take our break and we'll still end early. Okay, now this was also hard to find an image of it that was as clear and sharp as large as I want, but this is adequate. The next must know is fresco of a Mayan high priest, Mexico. Again, you go to northern little C, 900 AD. Fresco, I think you all know how to spell that, right? Mayan, we already spelled. So again, the title, fresco of a Mayan high priest, Mexico, 900 AD or CE. So now we're in that period most people consider the golden age of the Mayans. The Mayans still occupied large sections of the southern part of Central America, but most of what's now Mexico, well over half of what's now the country of Mexico, was occupied, or you could say conquered, controlled, whatever, by the Aztecs by the time the Spanish arrived, or even before that. But that's late, that's 13 to 1500s. So before that, up until around 1300, the Mayans were the dominant culture in this part of the world, the whole Central America. isthmus, I guess it's called. Well, anyway, that section between the U.S. border and South America was dominated by the Mayans, and their golden age was roughly 600 to about 1200. They began to decline even before the Aztecs pushed them out of what's now southern Mexico or conquered their cities, but not all of them. There still were, I think it's a couple dozen Mayan cities when the Spanish arrived, and of course they were destroyed by the Spanish invaders. So here is from their late golden age, a fresco on the wall of a temple, of a Mayan temple, and it shows a priest conducting a non-blood, just say a regular or just say a common, there we go, a common religious ceremony, a non-bloodletting ceremony. They're not either pricking themselves nor they're sacrificing any humans. They're saying prayers, chants, singing, all the other kinds of things you could associate with religious ceremonies. But look at his robes and his clothing here. This is a really fancy. It almost looks like he's carrying something. I know one of my class, I showed this just now. It's the second time I've ever showed it. Said, oh, that looks like he's carrying a large rug or something. No, it's part of the attire of the high priest. And you can see he's got almost today we call like a knee guard, right? And some kind of a shin guard like here, right? Because they did do kneeling and moving around, and they might have been on their feet for hours during some of these major religious holidays, ceremonies. And it's his headdress that tells us, in case we still had any doubt, this is not just another priest, newly initiated into that religious order, but an experienced high priest who is running probably the ceremony that he's a part of. Okay, and you can see the rich, deep colors here on the wall, right? And that's a stone wall. It's painted, and of course, fresco means it's painted into, right, wet plaster. So they did have plaster. It's probably a different composition than European plaster in the Renaissance for like the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Wouldn't be exactly the same, but it's similar. And that's why it survived with the color in such good condition, but also because it was probably away from the air. Most likely this would be a site that's either was buried or otherwise not disturbed, perhaps had a large stone blockage or door or, whatever, boulder of some kind perhaps, where it kept out most of the air. Otherwise it would be faded from this, and it's probably been restored. In fact, I know it has. It's been restored too. But the basic elements of the details, all the painted line, and the decorations, and at least most of the real original. I mean, colors were the way they looked and were found by archaeologists. There have been quite a few, and quite a few are in that museum that I mentioned, Mexico City. That was my favorite room, a room full of frescoes of priests from the Mayan Golden Age doing different activities. It was fascinating. They were all life-size, as is this image. So let's do the formal analysis and we'll take a break slightly early. And we're going to end quite a bit early, but there are 3 other slides, and I'm going to tell you right now that the Templo Mayor, Mexico City, is a very rich heritage to it. Maybe it was the main Aztec temple. So we're going to jump ahead to that because it's on the cusp of what we're supposed to stop somewhere between 13 and 1500. And as I did the Taj Mahal, I don't think that's breaking any rules that anybody could be upset about. That's from the 1600s, but it was associated with a culture that had been around for hundreds of years. So of course would this be. So Templo Mayor is an important slide. I'm not cutting that one from the study list. And then the two African ones, at least one of them has a high possibility of being on the final, but we'll still end early. And then as always, stick around, after the last 3 slides, which we're going to take our break in just a couple minutes, for as long as anyone has questions or comments that they want me to respond to. All right, let's do the formal analysis and take a break. This is balanced. I certainly think so. If you do the line here, well, there it is. There's a line. It's as much of the figures above as below. And he is mostly stable, but his headdress is dynamic. And some of the details on his, his fingers and his nose, obviously, some of his body parts are, but he is totally standing upright. So it's more stable than dynamic, clearly, this image. The color is almost all warm, except for his headdress. right? This is kind of an off-white all the way down to the brim, I guess it is. But almost everything else on his robes and his, of course, his skin and the yellow wall behind him, and then these symbols here, these are really interesting. I have no idea what those mean, except they're probably images, stylized as they are, of some of their major gods that temple was dedicated to, probably. And the line here is bold outline almost everywhere. I was going to say just around the borders, you know, in the top and the bottom, but actually, if you look closely, that's bold line everywhere you see around his entire body. And as they're modeling, minimal. Let's get up close, and I think you can see a little hint of it, but not really obvious. So there's no realistic modeling to separate out, you know, three-dimensional quality. So modeling as a technique isn't really used here. But semi-texture is, I would say, you know, on the robes, on the headdress, and on the skin, especially on the face to some limited degree. And that's done with painted line. There's no carved line here. Mass, well, it's really just him, but you could break it down into he's the largest mass and then the headdress if you want to. But his robes are part of his figure. So you kind of have to say that's not a separate mass unless you want to see it that way. And then for space, there is the it's a life-size image, you know, over 5 feet high of an adult male. And then we have overlapping as the only technique for space of the headdress, right, over his head, obviously, and the robes over his body. And then let's see, am I forgetting something? Modeling, texture. Yeah, I think I mentioned semi-texture is fairly realistic, but limited to mostly the headdress and the skin. I guess it is on the robes too. So it's fairly well done. All right, let's call it 7:55. So 15-minute break would be 10 after, rounding up. And I'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Okay. Here. Okay. So if you joined us late, obviously you can watch this by 8 p.m. on Friday. I'll have it posted probably before that. But I'll stick around afterwards to answer any questions we covered the first few minutes before some people joined us. Double confirming about the requirements for the paper, which is due if you don't want it to be late by midnight tonight, but only 5 points off if you get it in the next few days after that. Okay, so let's go forward now to the next must know. And again, I know some of you said you'd been to Mexico City, or at least Mexico. I don't know if that means you would automatically go to the capital and oldest continuously inhabited urban site in North America, Mexico City. Because if you count the Aztec occupation of what's now Mexico City, you would go back at least to 1300. Though there's a debate about that when it comes to Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico, that may be 1,000 years old. And I've been there and it's fantastic. It's in a reservation that's, you know, only by permission you're allowed to go all the way up this steep, narrow road to the top of this plateau. And the Pueblo, quote unquote, Native American occupied space there is probably about 1,000 years old. So that might be older, but it's just a few buildings. I wouldn't call it a city. I don't think anyone would. And it does have a Spanish mission from 1640 as a church. It's the real thing. It's not a replica or reconstructed, which of course was added to that area when the Spanish controlled the Southwest after they invaded. So what you see here is one of the oldest structures in the oldest urban center in North America. And that would be what today is Mexico City. But of course, before that, it was Tenochtitlan. I'll spell that for you. But here's the title, which is much easier to pronounce and remember. Templo Mayor, meaning major or main temple. Templo, T-E-M-P-L-O, Mayor, you probably know as M-A-Y-O-R. Looks like our English word mayor. Mexico City, current location. And the little c, again, you could ignore, 1350 A.D. The Aztecs were the last major pre-Columbian. Many of you know this, but if you don't, you should be writing it. The Aztecs were the last major urban civilization to dominate Central America, and they were an empire. They were very aggressive and successful, really, you'd have to say, in conquering nearby cultures and tribes and ruling over them for well over 2 centuries, from around 1300 when they began to expand from their base, which is the area that is now Mexico City, of course, outward into most now. By the time the Spanish arrived, they control most of what is Mexico, not all the way to the Rio Grande. They didn't get that far north, but well north of Mexico City and all the way down to about Guatemala, roughly the border of Mexico and Guatemala. And they were a powerful urban civilization. I think most people know that they developed all kinds of urban civilization aspects, you could say, of urban civilization. Great cities, for instance, Tenochtitlan. Now, if I had to spell that for you, I guess I could. In fact, I will. I'll tell you what, I will. You don't have to know how to spell it for the exam. Remember, any word not on the syllabus, you are not being held to spelling correctly. But Tenochtitlan, which was the Aztec capital on the site of what's now Mexico City, was spelled Tenochtitlan, Tenochtitlan. And that was the largest city. Many, just say many historians, because there's no absolute proof, because there weren't censuses taken all over the world back then, but there were in Europe at that time and Asia. And the Aztecs took censuses. So just say it was at least somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people during that 220 years or so that was the capital where the Aztecs ruled over their empire. During that more than over 2 centuries, it was perhaps, many historians believe, the largest city on earth. It was certainly bigger than any city in Europe in 1300. No question. There was no city on the continent of Europe that even approached 500,000. By 1500, there were some cities getting that large. Not many. London and Paris probably were close to that. But if it was 1 million, then it was clearly, so just say many historians believe it was that entire 200 plus years, the largest city on earth. That's a pretty major accomplishment right in and of itself. But it, of course, goes beyond population. They had an irrigation system and a sewage system and a sanitation system that was superior to anything, probably anywhere else in the world. Maybe in China. Yeah, probably some of the larger Chinese cities at that time would have. But Europe was in the middle of the Black Plague, right? The Black Death, the bubonic plague. I mean, and it was still the Middle Ages. It wasn't the Dark Ages. That's earlier. That's the early medieval period. But it was still a period of chaos and suffering and poverty and war and ignorance and superstition. So they didn't have as well run, as well managed, if you want to say it that way, urban centers as the Aztecs did. And then they also built these major structures. You could say massive or mammoth, if you prefer. That's a possible word you could use. Very large structures, of which this is what's left of the largest temple. Or really, again, it's a pyramid with a temple on top. That's always bears explaining. We've covered that before the break, right? So this is another one of those multi-level, multi-tier, you can say it either way, pyramids, which had a temple for religious ceremonies at the top. But it was dedicated to the serpent god. Now, there's no feathers coming off of this serpent's head here. So some people would say that's a different god. But I think other historians believe this image, which there are several of them on the different levels of this temple. And I think you can see this is reconstruction. So this section was missing. So they, connected it. But originally it was all this. I've been here and climbed up and down. I spent a whole day going. There's a museum underneath this, what would have been the hollow space below it, where some of the bones of the sacrificed victims would have been kept from human sacrifices. And it's now a museum, really interesting museum. So anyway, they've researched it a lot. It was rediscovered in the 1970s. It's all part of the meaning now, right? By construction workers. And it's near the Central Plaza, right? I forget the name of that plaza. Darn, I can see it in my mind. I've been there more than a couple of times. Anyway, just say the largest and most important plaza in Mexico City, which is where their national government buildings are. It's right behind that plaza. It's ironically close to the current center of Mexico City. That is, of course, now the capital of the nation of Mexico, which, by the way, some historians, sorry, I don't mean historians, some observers call the largest city in North America. There's a debate over whether that New York City, Greater New York, or Sao Paulo, Brazil, but just say it's one of the three largest urban centers, all three of which I just mentioned, New York, Mexico City, and Sao Paulo, Brazil, have over 20 million people. But Mexico City is about 22 million now. And it was built upon the ruins, of course, of Tenochtitlan. Okay, so let's get up close and see a little bit of this. You see some similarity with the feathered serpent god. That's why many historians believe this is an image of the same basic god, god of death, god of destruction. Well, there was human sacrifice carried out here and in greater frequency than in the Mayan temples. That is well established by the Aztecs priests, but they also had other non-bloodletting religious ceremonies as well. And what's left, I think you can tell, are the stairs leading to what would have been the temple on the top, with a large open, doorway, and then one big room or two rooms inside for the priests to conduct their ceremonies. That's missing. They may or may not restore it. It's been slowly being restored over the years. You can see, maybe you can't tell, but this is volcanic stone. It's fascinating, the color of that stone. Look at it, it's red and black and alternate. But this is the natural color of the stone they found. And then they also had a kind of a cement-like, it wasn't the same as the Romans exactly, but it was something that obviously they put together with some kind of mortar, flat tiles, stone, of course, tiles, not the ceramic tiles that was sort of broken, for the stairs. And then, so there was a construction here of both natural materials and man-made or human-made materials. Let's go to another view, and we're not done yet with the meeting. It's all part of the meeting now. See, there's the cathedral, the oldest cathedral in this hemisphere, the oldest Christian church, you could even say it that way, but it is a cathedral. It was established over the ruins of another Aztec temple. It's from it kept being built and added on to, but the original portion of it was from the early 1500s. And look they're literally just across the street from each other, these two. But it's ironic and fascinating to realize that these two cultures that clashed so destructively, at least for the Aztecs, had their centers within a stone's throw of each other in their heydays, of course. And that was the Spanish Empire. Now that's of course Mexico. It's not an empire, but it was, of course, under Spain. It was part of their empire. And then the most interesting thing in this picture is a bit grim, and yet there's no hiding the fact, no one would try to, that this was a site, I just said it was a site for frequent human sacrifices, and here is more evidence if it's needed. The skull rack, 2 words, is what Stockstead called it, and what it was called in some of the museum exhibits down below, where, as I say, if you go down below the actual ground level into a museum that's underneath what would be the foundation now of what they've found of this temple, the existing ruins of it, you'll see other evidence of that. And so these were some of the human sacrifice victims' images. Now, this is stone. These aren't actual ossified or petrified. Some people think that when I saw some tourists talking about from, I don't know where, New Jersey. Oh, look what happened. They put the skulls up and they turned to stone. No, the skulls are long gone, except for the part of underground. There you do see some of the original burials of the remains, I should say, of the victims of the human sacrifice. But here they're symbolized. And that goes back to, that's not the Spanish making some kind of comment about them. They had their own form of sacrifices, witch trials, right? And hangings and religious wars in Europe, of course. But here, this was there when the Spanish arrived. And the Spanish tried to destroy this temple. They covered it with rubble. They abandoned, they pulled parts of it down, but obviously didn't destroy it, or it wouldn't still be at least partially extant. And at least about half of the total site still exists, but it was buried for centuries and then rediscovered by construction workers, I think building a subway, I think it was, in the 1970s, I believe it was. And since then, it has been slowly being excavated and partially restored. That's the last part of the meaning, by the government of, well, I assume it's the national government of Mexico, the country, but it also might be city of Mexico City that's paying for the restoration. But this is the view if it's on the exam that you'll see. Okay, so yeah, it's hard to tell from here. So you're just gonna have to write that. It was originally completely symmetrical, as all fully complete pyramids would be, from left to right, and again, as obvious with all pyramids, unbalanced or weighted toward the bottom. The texture is simulated on the serpent god's head, but that's the only cement texture visible here. Everything else is the real rough texture of volcanic stone, or you can say cement or concrete, either word I guess would use, and tile. But it's all rough, real texture, except for the face here, or head of the serpent god. And then we have the rhythm, of course, of the individual stones, the stairs, the tiers, I mean, multiple rhythms here. And of course, those, the stairs, the levels, the different levels here, and the tiles are all stable. The serpent is dynamic, but it's the only thing that's, well, not exactly. There's a slight tilt to the sides of what would have been the stairs and the walls of the temple. Well, this wall doesn't, but that one behind it does. So the temple probably on top was about 20 feet high. That's the usual height of these, 15 to 20 feet. In any case, you can say the sides of the temple, of course, they tapered upwards like all pyramids, could be considered dynamic, but all of the individual sections, you know, the platforms, remember the talud section here, and then the tablero, right, or the back here, and each step, that's all stable. So it's both. The largest mass would be the pyramid itself, then the temple on top, of which all you have is the bottom, and then this sculpture of the serpent god, if you break it down that way. For space, it's a real space. They believe the temple was about 250, the entire structure, I'm sorry, from the base of the pyramid to the top of the temple, originally was about 250 or 60 feet. It's pretty good height. Taller perhaps than the tallest pyramid, I mean, at Teotihuacan. Just say it was one of the tallest pyramids in Central America, ever built, that we know of or has been found. So say about 250 feet. Some historians think it was, you know, closer to 230, but anyway, it's in that range. So nearly or almost 250 feet. And then we have the only technique for space. You could say that the serpent god overlaps the platform, that, you know, that step, if you want to call it that, because that's not really a step, obviously. The tulud or base of that level. You could say he overlaps there, I guess. That's it. There's no other technique for space. It's all otherwise real space. The rhythm is obvious with repeated shapes of the stones. Look at the colors, aren't they? That's fascinating. That volcanic stone comes in these different colors. It can be yellow too sometimes. Black and red mostly. And the colors, therefore, are warm and neutral. This is not original color here. It may look like that, but that's not. I already said that's a new modern restoration segment of it. So originally the colors were either black or red with some gray. So there is some cool, some warm, and some neutral, all three colors, because obviously these stairs are kind of an off-white gray, I should say, off-colored gray. There's no technique for modeling. This would be shadows, natural shadows from the sun. The lines here are carved on the head of the serpent god. Otherwise, they're all visual lines on the edges, right, on the corners. I think I mentioned the rhythm, yeah, and stable dynamic, yeah. Okay, I think we've covered it all. Okay, let's move on to the next. There's two more must-knows. Okay, now we've jumped across the Atlantic to Africa, which very briefly, just I'll give you like 2 minutes of context and keep it brief so we can end quite early actually here. Probably, easily by 9, if not before that. But there is more to say about these last 2 slides than just, a paragraph. They're important because they're the only images that we have from Stockstead that, we have the access to, and B, the information for, and C, the time to cover, and that's inadequate, woefully inadequate. I'm aware of that. Now, in my travels, I've been to North Africa, but I haven't been to Sub-Saharan Africa, so I don't have any of my own slides that I could add to this, like I have with some of the Art 1.1 classes, because of course Egypt, that's Africa, and it's ancient. It's pre-medieval, pre-Renaissance, so that isn't part of our parameters of our scope of this class. So I'll just give you this 2-minute thumbnail. Africa is the second largest continent in the world after Asia in terms of its size. And it so happens it's also the second most populous after Asia. There are about 600 million people in Africa. Actually, it's more than that. What am I saying? It's more than that. It's closer to 1 billion now. Yeah, it's almost 1 billion in the continent of Africa. And it has some of the, don't say the largest, oldest, but you'd have to say some of the, that's the safest way to write the context here. If you don't have to be writing this, but we'll get to this first must know in just a minute. But it has some of the oldest urban civilizations since ancient times. What do I mean by that? Post-Roman, the Roman Empire is a dividing. It just is for the whole world. I mean, people, whether they had anything to do with the Roman Empire, they did trade with Asia. The Romans traded with India, China, and some think even Japan. They weren't just dominating, the Mediterranean or that, and like nearly half of the known Western world. They, of course, did not rule over Asia or south of the Sahara, but the huge empire that they had a major impact on, the calendars we use, right? The times and the months of the year. So we use the Roman Empire era of the Roman Empire as a dividing line between the ancient world and the post-ancient world. So in the post-ancient world, if you want to use it that way, Africa has, or did have, some of the oldest urban civilizations. In other words, another way to say it is, now you should be taking notes on this, because this is an example of what I'm about to talk to you. So let me give you the title, second to our last slide for tonight, of course. It's the Ife, that's the name of the tribe that this ruler came from, capital I-F-E, Ife, head of a king. Nigeria, the country, of course, Nigeria, 1350 AD. Look, it's the same year as Templo, or same period as Templo Mayor. That's no coincidence, no accident. Okay, so here is the context that you should be taking notes on about the background that gives meaning to this slide. The Ife culture was an urban civilization in what's now Nigeria, which, by the way, is Africa's most populous country. It has been for decades. Egypt used to be, but now it's Nigeria. So in the Dark Ages isn't the right word. I want to avoid that. Middle Ages, sorry. In the medieval period in Europe, I already said this, but if you didn't write it, now you should, because it's relevant to this specific slide, the meaning. When the Ife culture created one of the largest urban civilizations in Africa, at that time, okay, Europe was still mired, I'd like to say, some people say wallowing, I wouldn't go that far, but mired in the late medieval period of chaos, of constant wars, of plagues, famines, poverty, and, superstition and ignorance. In Africa, particularly the Ife kingdom, and there was another called Songhay in another part of Nigeria, Songhi. I studied these things at UC Berkeley when I took world history there. History is my major, Cal Berkeley undergraduate. The point is that there were several, and so we don't have time to really go into any minor amount of detail about this one, but just so you know, it wasn't the only one. And then, of course, we're going to have the very last slide is Zimbabwe. I'll talk about that later, so I'm not going to add that to the notes for this slide. But the point is there were several, simultaneously, there were several highly developed urban civilizations with millions of people in them, and with cities that had at least a few 100,000 the major cities in those empires. Well, with the empires, they were cultures. It's hard to say empire again. Kingdoms. It's a better word is kingdom. They didn't really, at that point, try to conquer all their neighbors the way the Romans did. So just say in these kingdoms, these urban civilizations, within those kingdoms, their largest cities, at least the capital, and usually several others, the Ife kingdom, the Songhai kingdom, and Zimbabwe, and there were others, but those are the three main ones. In Sub-Saharan Africa, right below the Sahara Desert, had cities of well over 150,000, 200,000 in the range of the Mayans cities at this earlier, of course, with the Mayans they were earlier. But in Europe there weren't any cities that big. In 1,000 to about 1,400 was the heyday of those. And then the slave trading arrived and colonialism shortly after that. So you had several hundred years of these urban civilizations. Some would stretch that to 1,500 is actually more accurate. So over several centuries, roughly 1,000 to 1,500, these were urban civilizations in sub-Saharan Africa that flourished with large cities of around up to 250,000, or at least 100 to 200,000. So this was a king over one of the larger cities. Today we might say he's a regional ruler, more like a governor. But we know he was a ruler, even though there's no written records that was found with this when this was discovered by archaeologists or, I don't know, historians from perhaps Britain, because Nigeria was a colony when it was founded, a British colony. Hopefully it's in a museum in Nigeria, not in London, but I don't know where it is actually. But it's the head of a ruler, a regional ruler within the Ife kingdom. And the Ife culture believed in all of these things that you see here on his face. Okay, that's what's left of the headdress. Some think that is the full headdress. Others think that there were ornate, like the Mayan priest had, ornate feathers. And that's very likely. Much more above the band and the, some say cone or umbrella-like motif here. You see it. But that would be symbolic, a headdress of a royal person or ruler, whether it's a local ruler or regional or over the whole kingdom, would have had this kind of decorative detail in the Ife era. Beads, right, sewn in, and then some kind of, and that's kind of metal decorative piece, like a frontispiece. That's what I'd call it, but you can say it's a cone if you want. And then some kind of feathers, which are now missing, of course. The other two details that you should make note of that mark this as an Ife ruler are the striations. That's really the right word. You could say scar tissue if you want, or, scarification. That's what Stockstead says. So that word isn't incorrect. But that to me implies something different than what the purpose was. Striations, not stratification, that's something different. Striation, sorry. I'll say the word slowly and spell it. Striations. S-T-R-A, sorry, S-T-R-I-A. I apologize, T-I-O-N-S. Striations, one word, is a technique used by many of the early African urban civilizations, but especially true of all of the rulers and the ruling class in the Ife kingdom, where they, as young men, when they knew they would grow up to become a ruler, they had to be willing to have their skin on their face permanently scarred. That's what it is. But it's a mark of their courage, their endurance, their strength, and also symbolically their importance as a future ruler. So by the time they grew up, these had become part of their, and of course they weren't at all uncomfortable or painful anymore. They were part of their face, of their appearance, of their skin. And then the other thing, this is interesting, are the gold bands. These would have been gold. Look at them. There's 4 here, and might even gone for that. Elongated the neck again when they were like adolescent, young, like 12, 13, and they were known to become. I mean, they would grow up to become a ruler. They were expected to go through this. Their neck muscles and bones would be stretched longer than they would normally have grown by adding I don't know how often, maybe once a year or so, while the person was still growing, from early adolescence to adulthood, on top of each other one on top of the other, which would stretch the neck. And of course, the negative, you could say downside to that would be if those ever were removed by any means, you would almost certainly die instantly because your spinal cord would snap. So it again is a sign of the courage, strength, endurance, and of course, importance, therefore, the power of the ruling class, that they would subject themselves to these ceremonies that once they were over, that was proof of how important, how powerful, how strong, and of course, how brave they were. But what I like about this is nothing to do with those various details so much, although that's, part of it, is the face. Look at the detail around the eyes, the nose, the nostrils, the lips, the ears. This is superior to almost all European medieval sculpture at that time. There were some exceptions. You're going to see when we get to Gothic cathedrals toward the end, right in the next couple of weeks, one image that's this realistic inside Notre Dame, and it didn't get destroyed, by the way, in that fire. So there were a few European sculptors who were capable of rendering human facial features in this much detail, this realistically, and this evocative is a word I'd use. You can use expressive if you prefer. It has a personality, the face. You can get a sense of this person's realizing their role, their importance, without being arrogant. I don't see any arrogance here. I would think you guys would agree with that, right? It's not arrogant, it's confidence. It's what I see here. And of course, that's what he's trying to exude, or did just naturally. So that is a superior level of skill that sculptors in the Ife, Songhay, just say all these major, the main urban African civilizations, including this one, the Ife, were super skilled. I don't know if I'd use that word, but the consummately skilled sculptors had the skill levels above the average or the vast majority of European sculptors during the same period, which is during the Middle Ages. Now, in the Renaissance, of course, things changed in Europe and the skills increased greatly, but that was hundreds of years later. Okay, formal analysis. It is balanced. Yeah, it's a human head intact from the neck up. I don't know if I'd call this a bust. Usually that includes his shoulders, head and shoulders, or head and neck. And it's symmetrical, even though we're looking at it from the side. If you were to divide a, imaginary line down the middle, either way, top to bottom. However, some people would say because the top of the skull is obviously wider than the neck, but I consider this part of the entire structure of this piece of art. And therefore, I think of this as, the width of this is roughly the same as the, what's below his chin. So you decide if you think it's weighted more toward the top. I wouldn't argue with that. But to me, it's roughly balanced both ways. Okay, and then we have for our space, it's a life-size human head. So it is about a foot tall, including the crown or headdress. You can say it either way, a crown. It is a kind of crown. And that is because that's the size of it's actual portrait of a real, it's no question, it's a real person who sat for this, a ruler who was being commemorated by a local artist, probably at the request of the ruler. In any case, what we see here is simulated texture, yes, superbly done around the eyelids, the nose, the lips, the ears, the crown or headdress, and of course the skin on the face, the striations. And even on the gold band, that clearly looks like metal as opposed to skin up above. So it's all very realistic simulated texture, all done, of course, with carved line. There really isn't any painted line. But there are two colors here. The headdress is a warm kind of a pink, almost coral look to it, doesn't it? And this face is neutral. In this case, it's black, but I've seen other versions of other sculptors of, I guess, other rulers in the same era in the Ife kingdoms. I've seen images of them where the colors are all warm on the skin, on the face, because of the stone used. But here it's clearly some kind of black stone, and that is neutral, of course. And their modeling is the shadows from the sun. Here is not the sun, of course, it's in the museum now. So the museum lighting, if you want to just say it that way, that this photo was taken from. And then it's dynamic, of course, on the outer, right? curve of the entire head. And of course, the details are dynamic of the frontispiece or cone on the headdress. And the eyes, of course, the lips, the ears, and the neck. But it's upright, straight, direct, dead, straight on, looking at us, you know, if we were to stand in front of it, of course, in a very stable pose. So it's both, but the details are much more dynamic than stable. And let's see, modeling, texture, color, balance, the rhythm, I think is, yeah, I think that I mentioned that with the two eyes, of course, the two lips, the two ears, and the headdress. So it's quite a bit of powerful rhythm, in fact. Okay, so we only have one more. We're going to end probably just a tad before 9 or around 9. So that, but this one is even a little bit more historically well documented. In fact, here we don't have to guess about some of the facts on this last must know for now. Okay, so here we go. This is Conical Tower, you know, to be cone shaped, Conical, Conical Tower at Great Zimbabwe. And that's the word great, of course, second word Z, capital Z, I-M, B-A-B-W-E, again, pronounced Zimbabwe. The location is now the country called Zimbabwe. And I'll explain the origin of that word and its history in a minute. 1450 AD or CE. So this is one of the three. This was the capital city. Now here, there's no question. This is what we're looking at, is the walls around the original capital city of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, which today is the name of a country that occupies much of the same area. It's in southern Africa. If you say South Africa, it's confusing. I would avoid that because there is, as you all know, right, another country south of that. Zimbabwe is just north of South Africa. That's called South Africa. So I would just say southern Africa. But it is obviously one of those urban civilizations I just referred to. So if it's on the exam, you'd want to mention that as part of the meaning in the context part, which is that this was one of the urban civilizations that flourished during the Middle Ages in Europe, when there weren't cities as big as this in Europe. This city was, most historians put it at between 150 and 250. I'd say about 200,000 people. That's a lot. Even now, it's bigger than Santa Rosa, right? So we have what? 22 conical towers and 2 sets of walls that reach a height of the back wall. You could say rear wall or inner wall. Actually, it is the inner wall and it's the outer wall. So you should say it that way. The inner wall, or taller of the 2 walls, reaches a height of 25 feet. That's as high as the tallest walls of most Roman cities. Not all of them. Rome itself had higher walls, but many Roman cities. It is definitely as tall as the earlier Greek city walls in ancient, Greece, all over the Greek city states, right, of Athens. And it was, at the height of many of the tallest walls of any of the cities in Europe before this, 25 feet. And then we have the conical towers. Well, there it does, likes to jump. Hang on. All right, the conical towers are even taller. They reach a height of about 30 feet, like a 3-story, right, multi-story or multi-level building. Why they did that, we'll say in a minute, but just say there are 22 conical towers between the inner walls and the outer walls. And the outer walls were about 15 feet high. So why did they build the whole, around the entire city, all 200,000 or so people, with, living inside those walls? Because this was the wealthiest city in the southern half of Africa, and it was the most powerful kingdom in the side. When we say southern half, we mean from the Congo, right? If you've ever seen maps of Africa, the Congo is on dead center almost of the continent of Africa. So from that part of Africa, Central Africa, south, all the way to the tip of Africa, this was the largest, most powerful, and wealthiest, all three, largest, most powerful, and wealthiest city. And it was, at the time this was built, the most powerful kingdom too, the whole kingdom of Zimbabwe, which incorporated, hundreds of thousands of miles. Okay, but why do they do their city walls like this? That's not typical. You don't see that outside the Roman city walls or Greeks or even other Middle Eastern or Egyptian walls. Here's why. Because the rulers cared about their people, and the proof is right here. What they did was, besides defending, of course, walls are defending the people living inside them, they then allowed access to these grain storage facilities. That's what these were, where the people in the town, if they had a hard winter, any small portion or even the majority of the population was, in any way hungry, because of bad weather, bad luck, disease, plague, injury, whatever the reason, the rulers would grant them a portion of the grain stored each season, right after harvest, in these towers. And of course, that was controlled by their own, staff, if you want to call it, their guards. These were guarded, these towers, and that way, no one went hungry. Nobody starved, and there were, I don't think there was any homelessness, and there wasn't any hunger or starvation. That's not true of European cities during the Middle Ages, of course. And then these walls on the outer level protected the workers who came to get the grain in case, and also the grain itself. Of course, it's a really important last point about why they constructed the walls of the city like this. They were protecting the storage, the grain stored in these towers from theft and from enemy attack, and also the workers from being harassed, robbed, killed, whatever, harmed, while they went to get of course, as you can imagine, a door on the inside here facing these walls, and there's a gate we can't see here. There are 22 of these towers, and they're all still standing. They're just missing the top couple of feet. It's pretty remarkable. Look at how well fitted that stone is. Yeah, this is really nice to be able to see the close-up. I've never been able to do this before when I had slides that were just 35 millimeter. Kodak carousel slide. So look at how this is called fit. The last things about the meaning, two more things. Fitted, F-I-T-T-E-D, stone is not a small point. That's a kind of stone that the stonemasons have to be the best possible skilled laborers, because if you don't finish each stone, the surface of each stone, both the flat part of it and the shape and size correctly, they won't fit together. Or if they do, they'll be uneven, and the tower won't last very long. This tower has lasted without any repair or any reinforcement or any added cement or mortar. Nothing's been done to add to it for, let's see, almost 700 years. Yeah. That's pretty impressive. That's stone masonry at its best. Now, the outer walls are a little less perfect, but the inner walls are just as well done with the fit. So the fitted stone was reserved for the grain storage towers and the inner wall, which is the main defense. And the outer walls were just enough to, not badly made, but you see, they didn't last as long or as well. I mean, they didn't survive in as good a condition because they weren't quite as well fitted. But it didn't need to be, because they were only just short-term protection for the workers to come out and get the grain. Okay, so that's it pretty much on the meaning. Let's do a formal analysis. All right, we'll start with space. We have three structures here, or sections. The inner walls were about 25 feet when they were intact. I think they're missing the top foot or so, but to say they originally were about 25 feet high. The outer walls were about 15 feet high, and the conical towers were about 30 feet high. So it's all real space. There's no techniques for space, of course. Then we have the rhythm of the stones themselves, the fitted stones, and that creates visual line, because there is no other kind of line here. It's not carved. That's just what we see with a slight space and a bit of modeling, or small amount of shadow you can see between each stone, creates visual line. So there's no other carved line or painted line or any other kind of line. The largest mass is the inner wall, and then the outer wall, at least in this photo, and then the tower, because this has to be considered part of the outer wall. You can see here's a guard post. That's literally what this would. I didn't even mention that. I forgot. Because see, here's a doorway for one of the guards who would be stationed there. Not the same guard, of course, 24/7. Poor guy. But they would change the guard, I'm sure, every few hours. But anyway, there was always someone on guard in case someone tried to sneak over the walls or something. This city was never conquered until I believe it was the Dutch. I can't remember. I think it was the Dutch arrived in the 1600s with their weapons, superior weapons, of course, cannon and rifles and so forth. So it survived well past 1500 as an independent capital of a strong, independent African urban kingdom for at least a few hundred years. Some think it was founded around 1200, others say 1300, and then it probably started to decline around 1500, and by the 1600s it was taken over by European invaders. Okay, so let's wrap up the form analysis. Colors, this is not accurately reflecting the stone. This is the dirt or earth. So you've been to Georgia ever? I have. Yeah, it's red clay down there in the south. They even call it red clay country. And so that's just the oxidation of these chemicals in the earth that's splashed up over centuries of rain, of course. So that's not the color of the stone, in case you thought it was. The stone is all cool gray color everywhere, even where it looks like it's another color. That's a discoloration. Okay, and then we have the rhythm, of course, of the individual stones, and each conical tower is roughly the same shape and height, of course. Is it dynamic or stable? Well, each stone is stable, but the overall shapes, I would say, including the inner wall and even the outer wall, though this section looks pretty stable. So you could say that section is mostly stable. But here, look at the curve. That's rather hard to do with stones. Yeah, curved lines on the guardhouse. The conical tower, obviously dynamic, and the curve inward, convex, right? Yeah, not concave, convex, curving inward. A line of the inner walls. At least this part of it is all you could write about if you see it on the exam, of course, is what you see in the slide. That's dynamic too. So it's both. Modeling is just the natural shadows from the sun. And let's see, is it balanced? I would argue that each section, if you draw a line down the middle of the inner wall or this section of wall, well, of course, originally it went all the way to here and formed a right angle at the corner, obviously. And then this guard post, each section is balanced left to right. And then the walls, and I would include the guardhouse, those three sections are balanced top to bottom, but the conical towers weren't, of course. They're wider at the bottom, so they're unbalanced toward the bottom. And then the largest mass is the inner wall, and then what you can see of the outer wall, and then the conical tower. And if you want to go to the fourth largest mass, of course, it would be the guardhouse itself. And the textures, there are no simulated textures here at all. It's just the real rough texture of stone. There isn't even any mortar. And you wouldn't count the plant growth on top of each section. Okay, so we have covered everything and didn't have to rush or skip over anything. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to stick around as long as anyone does about your papers or about extra credit or about any slides we covered tonight, or if you joined the class late, any questions about what was covered. I'm not going to give the lecture, but I can summarize what we covered before the break or before some of the late sign-ins joined us. Anybody have any questions now at any point about anything we've covered tonight, your grades or the papers? I expect to see a lot more papers, I hope, by midnight, or certainly by tomorrow morning. So please try to get them done and get them in by midnight or as close to midnight as you can, if not before. But okay, this is your chance to ask questions. Anybody?
I have a question about extra credit.
Yes. Please.
I visited the De Young Museum and realized I could send you my tickets.
Yep.
Is there a specific title for the PDF when sending it to you, like there is with
good point. Yeah, I would just say extra credit museum visit if you can fit it in, and that's worth 10 points. Okay. You can do that twice. Any one of the categories of extra credit, everyone should know this, but I will send an email reminding you. But since you just asked, for your sake and those who are still with us, you could do 4 articles. That's because that's 20 points. So 20 points is what I'm saying in each category. And that would apply to 2 museum visits, 2 architecture sites, or watching 2 movies or documentaries about the life of an artist Remember, that's another one. It's kind of a creative, if not fun one, right? It just has to be at least an hour long. And then you need to write 2 pages, and you're not graded on content or spelling or what you learned about that artist from that movie or that documentary. Those are worth 10 points. You could do 2 of those. So if you just been to the one museum, what did you see at the Dion, by the way?
There was an exhibit on New Guinea art and also a lot of art of the Americas, like westward expansion
Oh,
art.
Uh,
There
from-
was a Frida
oh,
Kahlo exhibit
did
that I
you get
wasn't
to
able
see
to
it?
see.
Did you get to
I
see
wasn't
it?
able to.
I'm going on the 2nd. Yeah, it's kind of booked up. I should be going with a couple of friends, and if they bow out, my daughter said she'll go. I see more papers about Frida Kahlo than any other single artist in the last 10 years, at least since the. But of course, I like her work. I can tell you her work in person is even more impressive than the best image of it. And they're not large. Those paintings aren't very large. You could try again, because that would count as a separate visit, even though it's the same museum. They might not be completely sold out. The last weekend is the first weekend in May, because the following weekend they're closed, plus it's Mother's Day weekend. So you could try, but any other art museum, it doesn't have to be San Francisco or a major one. It could be the Sonoma County Art Museum in Sonoma, or the Santa Rosa Art Museum on 4th Street, downtown Santa Rosa. And there are a bunch of other museums, of course, scattered. Or there's the Oakland Museum. Oh, it's not open yet. Yeah, that's right. The UC Berkeley Art Museum is open, or even outside the Bay Area. Any art museum, like you said, just show me proof you attended, and the date and time, and put your name. Just, you don't have to write up what you saw. That's just proof that you attended the museum during this semester, and you'll get 10 points. And label it like that. Yeah, just say extra credit museum visit. Okay, that's a good question. Anybody else have any other questions about anything extra credit? Your grades, should be one-on-one confidential. You should do that if you have questions about your specific grade by email, and or the papers being due. And remember, if you weren't here with us at the beginning, please don't send them in a different format. Send them as a PDF only with the cover sheet attached in the same file, so they can be graded efficiently. And of course, to my Mark W, MARKW at AOL website, not the Outlook one, because it's much more difficult to navigate for me, at least, that site. And then also labeling it correctly. I'm not going to lift that up to the screen again. I already did. If you didn't join us by the time I did that, it's the same format as before, where you write, art 1.1, short paper number 2, underline first name, comma, last name. And that should be in the description on the PDF file. And then it'll get entered with all the others on time, and you'll get it back with those that were turned in on time, and it won't be a delay. Otherwise, if you don't do that, it can cause confusion problems, and yours might not get graded with all the others, and you might not get your grade back for a week or more after the others are graded. You don't want that if you can help it. Okay, any other questions at all? Well, thank you all. Good night. Good luck. Get your vaccinations if you have the opportunity. If my daughter could get hers, at 18, I'm sure almost everyone in our classes who is persistent. You got to be on their websites quite often. But if you're lucky, you might be able to get it through your local pharmacy. CVS is doing it, but they stopped the Johnson & Johnson. You may have heard that. But I think that's overkill. I mean, 7 people, that is tragic. No, 6 out of 7 million, that's less than 1 in a million. Your chances of dying when you get in a car on a freeway just to drive 30 or 40 or 50 miles back and forth are almost high. They are. They're greater than that. So it's really, I know they're being extra cautious, the feds, the CDC, just trying to be, very thorough. But the risk isn't even close to matching, or let alone outweighing, the benefits, of course. And everyone who's gotten their shots, I think, will attest to that. So if you haven't yet, try to do that if you can, as soon as possible, to protect yourself and the people you care about. Okay. All right. Good night, everybody. Take care. Have a good week. All right. See you next week. Oh. Okay, we're gonna